How's it going, everyone? A big talking point since the release of Silent Hill 2, and I can honestly say going back for the last year and a half, is that gaming has too many remasters and remakes. Now, remasters and remakes, I do feel like there is an element of people conflating the two things. They are very different things. Remasters, of course, I look at things like a Shadows of the Damned that's coming out later this month, or a Horizon Zero Dawn. That is a remaster, and then you look at the release of Silent Hill 2 or Resident Evil 4, the remake. Those are ground-up rebuildings of the game, but essentially, it's the same game being re-released for a modern audience, so to speak, and I know people hate the term modern audience, but you get the idea, with upgraded visuals, so on and so forth. Especially in the case of remasters, it's a lot less of a cost to the developer and publisher than what a ground-up building of a new game would be, but remakes are still incredibly expensive. When you're rebuilding a game from the ground up, that is expensive, but there's this idea of there being too many remakes, there being too many remasters, and let's tackle those things separately. Let's first talk the topic of remakes. Really, I don't feel like when you just look at the remakes, not remasters, we are looking at the remakes. The Resident Evil remakes, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 less so, Resident Evil 4, which was phenomenal. Resident Evil 4, the remake, RE4 was already one of my favorite games of all time, and I often say it, what happens when you take one of the best games of all time and you remake it? It's one of the best games of all time again! And that's how I really feel about RE4, the remake. And now Silent Hill 2, those are some of the remakes that have happened, and I think all of those, Dead Space as well, of course. I know we're very much stuck on the horror games, but a lot of these remakes have been horror games. The remakes, I think, have been rather good. Now, I look at something like an Until Dawn, if you want to call that a remake, that was nonsense. That game's a decade old, still looks pretty good. If you wanted to port that game, do a remaster, I think that would have been fine, but a $60, remake, and again, there's stuff like Until Dawn, Last of Us Part 1, where they may be promoted as a remake or a rebuilding. That to me comes across more as a remaster. Like Until Dawn, I guess you could say that's a remake, it's on a new engine. Last of Us Part 1 to me is just a remaster. So really, it does come down to how you describe these things as well. But when we look at a lot of the remakes, I don't think we can throw them all under the same umbrella. And certainly, we can't throw remasters and remakes under the same umbrella. But for a large majority of them, Silent Hill 2, Resident Evil 4, those two obviously stand out to me the most. I think the remakes have been fine. And again, Resident Evil 4, when it came out, and to a lot of us, especially people my age, late 20s, early 30s, or even a little bit older, Resident Evil 4, the original, is still seen as an incredible game. However, you have to realize that these IPs have to be accessible to a newer audience as well. Yes, I personally can go back and play Resident Evil 4 from, when was it, 2004, 2005, but if I tell my 18-year-old cousin, hey, go check out Resident Evil 4, it's one of the best games of all time, and he plays the original RE4, and he's more familiar with his Xbox Series X games and his PS5 games that he's played, Resident Evil 4, going back and play that, that's gonna be an incredibly dated experience, and it's about drawing new people in while also being a compelling experience to older fans. I don't know the split of how many people that played the RE4 remake were newer players versus older players, but I do think it's an effective way to bring back these iconic games and also be accessible to a newer audience. This isn't a crap on older games. Older games can age very gracefully, but at the same time, I know that expectations are gonna shift. And people of a certain age are gonna go back and play older games and they're gonna be like, I can't get into this because of the visuals, the gameplay, whatever the case may be, where I think a remake for RE4, a remake like Silent Hill 2, makes a lot of sense. Dead Space, you can make the argument that game's from the PlayStation 3 era, it didn't really need a remake, but I would say, hey, PS3 games aren't accessible on PS5, and Dead Space was an absent franchise for a long time. I had no problems with that remake either, and I thought it was fine. Where I think people get upset and get annoyed is when they conflate the remakes and the remasters, and when we look at remasters, there's a lot of them. I remember when I was doing my upcoming October Games video, which you guys can go check that out, I realized I was saying remake or re-release a lot. So I have the October Games lineup pulled up here. Let's go through some of them. You had Until Dawn, You had Silent Hill 2, you had New World Eternum, if you want to look at that. That's not really, you know, remake or anything like that. But Sonic X Shadows Generations, Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven, that is also an updated release. You had Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and you had Shadow of the Damned Hella Remastered. Oh, by the way, Clock Tower Rewind as well. All of that in a single month. Okay, that's a little bit insane, but when you look at it from the lens of, okay, let's just assess the remasters. The reality is, you guys, the idea that these remasters are stunting the development of a lot of other games, that's just not reality. You think Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, which is being done by Nixxes Software, is stunting Guerrilla from doing their other games? You want to know what's stunting Guerrilla? The fact that Guerrilla is doing a live service project, that's what's actually delaying the release of Horizon 3, and it's going to take a while for us to get Horizon 3. That is the reality of the situation. And then you have something like Sonic X Shadows Generations, which, by the way, does include a standalone Shadow experience. It is a remastered release of Sonic Generations, adding a new campaign. That's a release that you can look at, okay, it's $50, but at the same time, I don't think this arduous development cycle was attached to it, and it's a way for Sega to annualize the Sonic franchise, which they're clearly trying to do. I'm not saying that makes it okay, but I'm actually excited for Sonic X Shadow Generations, and Generations is a great game, not accessible on PlayStation 5 either, so that one I'm fine with. Romancing Saga 2, it's a remake and it's a niche title at that. You think that's stunting the development of the next Final Fantasy? Or, you know, maybe they could do a smaller scale JRPG that's different and they could allocate their resources towards that, but I think that's a fine release as well. I really don't think there are too many remakes when you look at them in a vacuum. When you look at each individual game in a vacuum, I don't think it's a problem. Where I think it becomes a problem, and here is the issue with Sony doing all of these remasters and remakes, which I think really annoy people, and that is going to be the primary topic of all of this, is that Sony gets a lot of criticism, and rightfully so, for spamming remasters and remakes. Let me go back to the fact that I really do believe right now it is an optics situation, and you have to add context to where Sony is. Sony is releasing a $700 console. Sony has very little first-party output, but you know what they do have from a first-party output? Oh, we got time to re-release Last of Us Part 2. Oh, we got time to re-release Horizon Zero Dawn all in the same calendar year. So we got time to remake Until Dawn as well and allocate resources towards that. So optically, it just looks really bad. In a vacuum, you guys, Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, I really don't think people would give a damn about it. It's a $9.99 upgrade, and I really do think it looks a lot better from a visual standpoint. However, this goes back to the optics and contextualizing the situation that Sony isn't putting out any new games. I don't believe, however, they are being stunted with the new releases when it's because of these remasters. What it's because is Naughty Dog cooked themselves for a lot of years doing that live service game that'll never see the light of day. How do you get some financial return on Naughty Dog in the interim when they aren't putting out any game? Let's do a Last of Us Part 1, let's do a Last of Us Part 2 remaster. Some people will buy it. Guerrilla's working on a live service title right now as well. How do we keep Horizon in the news cycle? We're doing this Lego Horizon game as well. Let's do Horizon Zero Dawn Remaster. We get to, add this PSN account linking on PC as well. There's reasoning to do it. I'm not agreeing with it, but I really do believe people are more so down on remasters, especially in a Sony case, because of the optics and them not releasing any new games. However, if 2024 had the release of, let's say, the Marvel Venom game, let's say Ghosts of Yotai came out this year, let's say Last of Us Part 3 actually was in development like it should have been for all these years, and maybe it actually would have come out in 2024. It probably would have been a 25 game, but let's just say there were major first-party titles like that, and then as accessory releases, you had Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, you had Last of Us Part 2, I really don't think people would give a damn at that point. Let me take you guys back to 2009. 2009 is when I remember the remasters really becoming a big deal and people getting on that train. God of War The Origins collection came out, and that bundled God of War 1 and 2. God of War 1 came out in 2005, and it was followed up by the release of God of War 2 in 2007. God of War the Collection on PlayStation 3 came out in 2009, just a couple years later. The difference is Sony pulled backwards compatibility from the PlayStation 3, so there was this reason to really want God of War 1 and 2 on the PlayStation 3. But think about that. Sony pulled backwards compatibility. That was a feature that was removed from the PlayStation 3 to bring down the cost so that we could get it down to $300. And then they released God of War the Collection to get you God of War 1 and 2 on the PS3. If something similar to that happened these days, people would lose their effing minds. Like, if we got backwards compatibility for whatever reason pulled. Now, backwards compatibility is a software thing, and I believe with the PS3, it like literally had guts inside to make it run the PS2 games. So it's a different era, but think about that for a second. A feature was removed, and then they are monetizing a collection to play the games that the old feature was supposed to offer you guys. That's a little bit insane. However, adding more context to the situation, 2009 was a different ball game than it is today. Back in 2009, what was Sony doing? Oh, they're bringing out the PS3 Slim. It's not a $700 console. In fact, it's a $300 console that's bringing it in line with the other console that is available in the 360. These days, you got a $700 console coming out with no other big first-party titles. What else was happening in 2009? Was Sony putting out first-party games? Were they putting out big exclusives? You damn right they were. They were putting out Killzone 2 in February of 2009. They were putting out Infamous in May of 2009. They were putting out Uncharted 2 in October of 2009, and by the way, that wasn't all. They published Demon's Souls, and we had Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time. All of those games in a single calendar year, where you look at God of War Collection and it's just like, alright, this is just an accessory game, this is another game. And guess what? Back in 2009, I was super young. I was 13 when God of War Collection came out, but I remember people were absolutely hyped for the God of War Collection. And at that point, obviously, remasters weren't done to death, but I do think it's more of a case of people just being sick and tired of only getting remasters and Sony not putting out anything else, and they're using remasters as a bit of a crutch so they can focus on live service games and they can pretend like they have new games coming out. I'll also throw out God of War Collection was, I believe, just 4 months before the release of God of War 3, so the timing for all of that worked out really well, but that led into the Sly Collection, that led into the Ratchet Collection, and I believe there was a Splinter Cell Collection, a Prince of Persia Collection. All of those were a-okay, and people were excited about those, but that's because around them you had a lot of big games coming out, and I think that's the difference, especially when you talk about it from a Sony standpoint. We're talking about Last of Us Part 2, we're talking about Horizon Zero Dawn, and Horizon Zero Dawn came out 7 years ago. I know it doesn't feel like 7 years ago, but that's a long time. The game still looks really good, but I think this upgraded release does look a fair bit better. The issue with all of this is that we're not getting new experiences and new games. I'm not saying new IPs, just new games out of these big first-party development studios like we were getting in 2009, like we were getting in 2010. Again, let me go through that calendar year for 2009 for you guys again. Instead of a $700 console, you had a new slim design of the PS3 coming out that was $100 cheaper. On top of that, in a year where this year the first-party output was Astrobot and Concord, in 2009, it was Killzone 2, it was Infamous, it was Uncharted 2. That's just off the top of my head. That is from your first party. Then you had the second party exclusives because Insomniac wasn't owned by Sony at that point, but they had an agreement to do Ratchet & Clank, A Crack in Time. And then Sony also published Demon's Souls. That was all in a single year, and God of War Collection was just like, okay, here's this as well. That's the difference when it comes to Sony in particular and them spamming out remasters. Remasters are fine. I don't think it's a big deal. It's not a big investment. It's not stunting the development of Horizon 3. What is going to stunt the development of a lot of these development studios is their push for live service games, and remasters are getting the brunt of it because that's what's coming out. But it's not like they're moving heaven and earth to get these remasters out, and when you talk about remasters and remakes, I do think it's an issue of people conflating the two things and putting them all under the same umbrella. And I think a lot of the remakes have in fact been really, really good. But that'll do it for me. In a vacuum, I really don't think the Horizon Zero Dawn remake is that bad. It's the context when you see that they have a $700 console. It's the context when you see that their first-party output has been incredibly weak and you're getting like Until Dawn, Horizon Zero Dawn, like this is your first-party output for the year? Astrobot was great, but outside of that, it's been rather lackluster. When you go back to 2009, one of my favorite years in gaming of all time, that was a year that the first-party output was nuts by Sony, and you had a collection in God of War Collection, and it was fine. But that'll do it for me. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Sound off there. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.